Welcome to Allies or Enemies. I'm Jess.
And I am Sean. And today we are talking about Tiny Epic Crimes, which is published by Gamelyn Games and designed by Scott Almes. And we were provided this copy by the publisher for review, but the thoughts in this video are all our own.
And in Tiny Epic Crimes, you are police officers trying to solve the crime as you go around town, collect various bits of evidence. But let's take a closer look at how it plays.
Players start the game with a special ability, a car at headquarters, and a crime to solve. Each turn, you will first drive and then take an action, which includes several ways to gather clues, such as searching for evidence by flipping tokens, catching informants or witnesses if you catch a mobster in the right row or column, bringing in a mobster for holding by taking them to HQ, stakeouts, which involve betting time to gain tokens, and good old-fashioned arresting. Whichever player gains the third of a kind of token also gets to take a peek at one piece of evidence. Also, all of these actions move your marker up the time track, and sometimes over these lines, which cause events which are bad things that you need to deal with. Once your timer crosses into the red zone, you can choose who you think did it. And once everyone rests their cases, the murderer is revealed and the best detective is named. On top of the competitive mode, you can also play the game cooperatively, which is mostly the same, but you share info. But each detective only has access to some of the actions. So you'll need to decide who's the wild card and who's too old for this.
So that's how it plays, and I like that there are the two different options of choosing the competitive and the cooperative. And our very first game, we played cooperatively, which was a good way of being able to learn the rules together. So I do recommend maybe for your first one of playing it cooperatively. But I think overall, I'm probably going to choose the competitive one more.
Yeah, I totally agree on both things. I'm really glad we played co-op together because it's just lower stakes and you can all learn, and it's a little gentler, I guess, but the competitive feels like that's kind of the full game. Like the competitive, you're doing a lot more of gaining the suspect cards, and you're trying to finish those events partly just to learn what other people know, because only some people have those like key bits of information, and those are so important. Like you need to have at least 3 of those, and especially in a 3 or 4 player game, you really have to finish off those events so you can learn what other people know.
Yeah, and I think in the competitive mode as well, how much time you spend becomes even more important because you may be able to pull off 2 turns in a row if you do low-cost actions. So I really like that decision of needing to try and do things more efficiently. I mean, cooperatively you do too. The timer is really ticking down. I think you just feel it more in the competitive mode.
And I also like that when you've got 1 of something and then someone else gets 1 of something, like you have to think about, oh, am I setting up someone to get the 3rd one? Because that's really the key bit of information. But also trying to get on board with all of them so that you get a suspect whenever it's solved. And I think that's a really nice dynamic.
Yeah, I do like that there are a lot of, you don't have access to everything all of the time, which is nice too, because that also might play into when you decide to go into day or nighttime. Is, if each of us have 1 and we're working for that 3rd one, I might actually want to get back into the other phase that will then give me the opportunity to get that 3rd token. So I do like that depending on whether it's day or night, you can only do some of the actions, and the actions all have a cost, and then things get changed up drastically with those event cards as well. And at first, I don't know how, at first I thought the event cards were probably too harsh. Some of them felt really difficult to achieve, and some of them were just like, you can't, do the pink action anymore. And it's like, but I was working towards that. But I think it is necessary.
Yeah, and I think after we've played a little bit more, we're a little less afraid of them too. But I think the key isn't so much I think you're right. It's first of all that like negative thing of now you can't do this. But it's also the positive thing of you want to learn that information. So you are
going to risk those because it can be such a big payoff on those. So they just kind of naturally will go away a bit. You're still going to have 2 or 3 too many events penalties, but losing, all you do is you lose a suspect. And you can lose 3 or 4 suspects in a game and still learn everything. And so it doesn't really make sense even to solve those for the first half of the game. It's kind of, those come into play once someone has learned a core bit of information that you want to steal from them.
Yeah, because they can cost a lot of time. So if you solve it early before anyone knows anything, you're really missing out on one of the core rewards. And that does bring me to one of the aspects is the randomness that can happen. And so a key part of a lot of the things you're doing is betting on time. And time is a very precious resource. You know, you won't have everything you need by the time you get to the end. You don't want to be spending a lot. So it is tricky. You have to be okay with knowing that you will decide ahead of time of how much time to risk. And the odds might be in your favor and you might still fail. And that can be tough.
Yeah, it's really tough when you bet like 5, because there'll be some that say something like choose 1 to 5, roll a dice. As long as it's equal to or lower, you succeed. But you can bet 5 plus move. That's like 6. You've only got 50 time in a game. That's a huge amount of your time. And then roll a 6 and get nothing out of that turn. And that does feel bad. There are odds, and that's part of the game. But that does feel bad. There's also the randomness of those events, because some of them, especially at 2 players, are basically impossible. It's like someone has to stand on a suitcase and someone else has to stand on the other suitcase, and you're just not going to coordinate and do that. You're just not. So in a 4-player game, that probably is going to happen. So I would say, like, we're probably going to start taking out a few of those just to even that out a bit. But again, it's like there needs to be a bit of randomness. Otherwise, I don't think it would quite work. And I like the brown ones that you have to kind of decide how much you want to gamble on what number it's going to be. I think those are good because if you fail once, you know what the number is, so the next time you'll succeed.
That's true. It does give you some information. And speaking of randomness, that leads us into replayability, because the randomness of which events come out and the aren't always going to be guaranteed to succeed does give it some replayability.
It does, and there's the obvious randomness is it's going to be a different person who committed the crime each time, so you're not going to know, and the puzzle's always going to be new, because that's just the nature of this sort of game and the puzzle. And the city is all placed differently, so that's going to change things. The events are going to change things. The who you're drawing out of the bag is going to change things. So there is quite a bit of variability.
Yeah, and one of the biggest ones too is your ability. So at the beginning of the game, you get dealt 2 ability cards and you pick one of them, and that does change things a bit. I will say they do seem to be a little bit uneven. Some of them seem stronger in some games than others, but that having that ongoing throughout the game ability also makes it feel different. There are also a couple of expansions. The first one is a mini expansion called Crooked Capos that adds 2 modules. The Crooked modules is a bit of a hidden role, and the Capos modules adds these more challenging mobsters that give you bigger rewards when you arrest them. On top of that, there is a much bigger expansion called Kingpins, and that adds a whole bunch of stuff. One of the main things is you are trying to figure out who the Kingpin is on top of doing everything else.
Yeah, the Kingpin one is really a whole other level. We played it in like our 4th game, and it felt like a lot. There's already quite a bit to keep track of when you're following like all of the event things and everything else that's going on. But this is like, now you're getting, basically you kind of have to solve almost 2 cases at once, because you've got this shared little car that moves around, and that's like busting up these like flop houses, and then those are deciding who the Kingpin is. But you want like one kind of like flop house thing. They're like violence, or I don't even remember. They're like the 4 different kind of attributes, and you want one of them to be involved in the Kingpin. There's too much of it to explain everything, but it's interesting, and it's cool to have. I think once you've played like 10 games of this, I think you would get a little tired of how the base game plays, and this does add a whole other layer that I think is neat. but I don't think I'll go back to it until we've got to like that 10 games.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't throw it in the first game. I
No.
would wait at the kind of that 10 game level where you are very comfortable with your actions, with keeping track of the events and everything else. But it is nice to add if you are finding you're kind of doing the same thing and if it's feeling a little bit similar for sure. In terms of the other one, I think if we aren't using Kingpin, we'll probably add the capos because those are a nice little addition.
Yeah, I think the capos are great. There's kind of no reason not to add them because they're just like a little bit harder to find. Usually you have to be at a certain level on your like little badge track, and then there's just some little like they cost one extra time or they do whatever, and then they all give you a different benefit, which I like. The hidden role thing though is I wouldn't use it at 2 at all. Maybe at 4 players it would be more interesting because it's not like even a hidden traitor. It's just one person can't drive their car where other people have cars. So you're just kind of watching for that. And if you call them out on it, you get a little benefit. If you're wrong, you lose a little bit. If no one calls you out, you get a little benefit. And the benefit's like one time or you move one on your track or whatever it is. So it's not huge, but it gives you something in a 4-player game that you can kind of watch on other people's turns, which is fine. But I think that one's like, if you didn't get the Kickstarter, you don't have it, you're fine. But the Kingpin, I do think if you've played a bunch and you're like, I really like this game, and I just want a little more. I think that moving the patrol car and getting rid of things, and you've got these cool monuments on the board, and they just look cool, and extra cards and all sorts of stuff that I really do think adds another layer. But it's just a layer you do not need for your first chunk.
Because it is hard. I think they timed the end of the game really well. It's been rare that we have 100% known who it was that did the crime. It's often between like 2 people, which is a really nice way to go where you think you might have it, but there's a chance that you don't.
Yeah, it's usually the last turn. If I get it, it's the last turn. But you're right. It's most games has been out of 2 or 3, and then I make a guess. And I've never guessed right. I've got it. I've fully 100% got it down to the 1 and got it. But anytime it's been a 50-50, I've gone with the wrong person.
Yeah, I have also done that. So it is beneficial to 100% get it, but you're not necessarily going to. And I wonder, though, if that does change with player count. So I will say that we have only played at 2 players, and it works really well as a 2-player game. At 2 players, there are 2 of the clue tokens that are only 3 instead of 5, the pink and the blue. So often for those, it is a race of who is going to get the 3rd one to be able to get the final piece of evidence for that. But at more players, there are 5 of them. So you're just going to have less of a chance of being the one that gets that final clue token.
Yeah, and you'll also have to risk a little bit more on the brown ones where you have to roll like the 1 to 5. At 2, we find ways, like there are a few of the force cards that let you peek underneath a few of them. So we tend to be able to avoid that 4 and 5, but at 4 players, you're going to be like, I know it's a 5, and I'm still going to do it because I need to get that suspect card. So I do think that there are a lot of ways where that 4-player game is going to be a little bit more interesting, but I was happy that it still works at 2. But let's talk a little bit about the components. So what do you think about the components?
I think the components are a bit of a mixed bag. I think the city comes together really nicely. I like that all the cards fit together so well. I like the little car that you're driving around as well. I think the art is nice. I like your image of your people for the detectives. I think where it gets a little bit tricky is how they do the suspect cards. So the suspects one of them is going to be the murderer that you're trying to solve, and it uses the thing where you have to use like a red looking glass.
Yeah, like they used to be in like cereal boxes.
Yeah, exactly. But you can still read it without the red thing.
Kinda, yeah.
So they've solved that by having, when you get one piece of evidence, instead of, just looking at that one piece with your viewfinder, you put it in a whole separate envelope, which is good. It means you only see that one bit. But the envelopes are really tight. And so what that means is we have had it where a suspect card has gotten a bit like nicked on the bottom. And that means from now on, if we see that suspect card somewhere, we know who it is.
Yeah, and I wish I didn't remember it, but I will remember it forever. I think the only thing that's going to fix it is when a second or third, like I kind of want to just jam them all in that envelope and get them all nicked, hopefully
Hopefully in the same way, though.
yeah, in kind of the same place. But yeah, they are a little tight. And people online have said kind of stretch them out a bit. Like people have said use a bread knife or use whatever. We didn't know that, so we just went right into it. So I guess try and do that a little bit. But I think in general, that's going to be the one complaint that a lot of folks have. But in general, I do like it. And I really like the bad guys. They all have, like, there's a nice mix of people. They have these fun little alliterative names. And I think that's really nice. I think the capo thing is, I think how everything's kind of screen printed is nice. I would say I kind of wish, so we got these little guys here, which are a little bonus add-on, I think, that you could have got. These are great.
Yeah.
So if you can get these, I definitely would. They're just a little book where you write in your evidence, and they're fun because they flip like a little police book, and then you write in who you've got. If you don't have these, it's fine. You've got a card that has this, and you can write the information, and it's not going to be like the end of the world at all. But I like this. I like writing on this. It's fun, and it's got that that kind of Clue thing, because people are going to compare this to Clue, and I guess that's fair because it's like the other game where you're kind of doing this, but this plays way, way different to how Clue plays. And it's quite a bit better game, I would say. Clue, I loved as a kid. I loved it. I'm not throwing shade at Clue, but it hasn't aged as well as I might like it to. And this is a little bit like maybe what you wish it was. And because it plays it too as well.
The one thing I will add to the components as well is the bag is nice and soft. I really like the bag that you're pulling the mobsters out of too. But going back to it being like Clue, who do you think this game is for?
So I think that first group is maybe a little bit that you are kind of nostalgic for Clue and you want a little bit of that. This is not a deductive game like that is, and I'll stop comparing it to Clue because really it is so surface level. But this is not a deductive game if that's kind of what you're expecting, because it's not like other people have information that you can kind of figure out by how they interact with other folks. This is much more, you want to solve those things, and that's going to directly give you information. But the interesting thing is that interaction of, like, when do I leave you that third thing for you to get that key bit of evidence? Versus but I also want to be part of getting that evidence. It's this interesting kind of interaction that I think is a little bit different from most games, where it's not really mean, but it's not super nice, but it's just there. But there is quite a bit of interaction.
Yeah, I think the interaction really plays into efficiency because you're trying to determine which action would be the most efficient, so you're spending the least amount of time to give yourself the most amount of turns, but factoring in what information the other players have, so that might change the direction of what you need to do when. And because of that, you don't want to leave them an opportunity, and you want to jump on any opportunity that becomes available as well. But it isn't a negative interaction, and I think they tried to add a bit more interaction with the Crooked mini expansion, but it still isn't like a negative interaction or deducing what people say. So if you're looking for that, this doesn't have that.
Right. I will say another group that is going to like this, obviously, if you're a fan of the Tiny Epic games, we've played all of them. We have all of them. We enjoy the series, and I think this does something different. That's one of the things I like about the Tiny Epic series is all of them do something a little bit different. And they're not like 10 out of 10 games, but they're solid games that come in a really small box, and this continues that. And I would say this will probably make like my top 5 in the series. It wouldn't be my number 1, but I think it's solid, and I think it does something different than any of them do. And I think one of the cool things about this one is a lot of the other games, I'm like, oh, okay, this feels like a smaller version of that. But that's not always the case. This one doesn't feel, at least not that I've played, like a smaller version of anything that I can just go, oh yeah, this is that. This is like kind of its own thing.
Yeah, it feels like its own thing, and it might be that we haven't played these type of
We
games
haven't played
enough.
the whatever it's the smaller version of.
Yeah,
maybe.
exactly. But it does feel different to us, and it felt unique. I went in with kind of no expectations of what it would be, and I've really enjoyed being able to figure it out, and this amount of strategy that there is, I think I found surprising, just because of that initial, is this going to be like Clue comparison?
Right. And I went into it with a bit of expectation because I really like film noir and I really like detective stuff. So I was like, I think I'm going to like this one. And I had a little bit, I think, of a higher bar than you. And it did meet those expectations. I'm not saying that this is like, it's going to blow your socks off, that this is like an absolute must have. But if you like detective-y stuff, if you like tiny epic-y stuff, I think people are generally going to be pretty happy with this game. Just know that it's not like a deduction game.
And I will add that if you really hate randomness, there is a bit of randomness in here with the dice rolls and the event cards. But there is also quite a bit of strategy, and maybe more than you might expect. We have had a couple of games where the dice gods have not been on our side, and that can be frustrating. So if you don't want any randomness, just be aware that this does have a little bit.
And that is it. That is Tiny Epic Crimes, the latest one that we have played in the Tiny Epic series.
Thank you so much for watching. Please let us know in the comments if you've played Tiny Epic Crimes or what your favorite crime-themed game is. And as usual, please like, subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you next time for another game.